All right. What are you drinking?
Dr. Pepper Cherry.
Oh my gosh. Freaking clown. All right. So we're gonna do some of these, right? We're gonna do some of these videos. I guess so this is what happens when you get me and Andrew bored and it gets cold and stuff starts going on. We're not fishing tournaments. Then we get to thinking too much and we start doing these videos. So we're gonna do more of these. I had a bunch of our last video, crazy amounts of comments on both of ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so which is good because it's kind of like why we like the live streaming stuff, but we're going to start doing these just lead to more conversations and more comments. This is the one that there was one question or comment, however you want to do, and I honestly I can't find it anymore. I don't know if it got deleted. Andrew said you looked for it too.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I didn't see it.
Okay, so here it was this deal on sight fishing off beds and how it's ruining our lakes. And the reason they got brought up is this whole live scope and what we kind of think where live scope's going. Is it hurting it's not necessarily is it hurting our fisheries, it's just where's it all going, whether it be fishing, tournament related. It's just we're kind of going down the path of fishing, like what direction it's going. And then that turns into other stuff. And then someone wants to comment about sight fishing. Man, do I have some opinions on sight fishing.
Let's be honest. You have opinions on everything.
Yeah,
but
yes, but some of them are like fun, like some of them are like whatever. Like I don't really.
Yeah.
Like I have.
No, you definitely have some opinions on sight fishing. I do too. Coming from a background of doing it a ton and knowing what it takes to be successful with it, and I'll kind of let you do your deal on it, but I definitely have some opinions as far as why it's not the end all be all, or
No,
even in the same realm or conversation as something like live scope ever.
And
ever
here's
would
the
be.
crazy part. What I stay up sometimes at night, like going over these conversations in my head, like thinking about like the arguments of it. I had to finally stop thinking about it because there's so many arguments that are so against this thought process. And one of the problems is these blanket statements. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a blanket statement. Sight fishing hurts fishing. It's hurting our fisheries. And I'm just like, awesome. Now why? And then the explanations behind it are so not well thought out whatsoever. They're like just rant. It's like they heard it somewhere and they're like, hey, I'm just going to repeat that without actually sitting down and thinking about any of this stuff that goes on, any of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it blows my mind. So let's start, because I should have wrote them all down, but I'm not going to because I don't do things that way.
Well, yeah. If anybody's watched our fantasy fishing stuff, they know you don't write anything down ever.
Well, I thought about doing that deal I did with John Suckup, and he wrote like 8 pages on the deal about live, and I was like, man, that's so good. Like he was so well prepared. But yeah, I just wing it. So one, there's 2 different arguments here, right? Is sight fishing hurting our fisheries, and like the difference between catching a fish off of bed and keeping a fish off of a bed, right?
Well, yeah.
That's a whole different argument. That's a keeping fish argument. Has nothing to do with sight. Like however you caught it is irrelevant. You catch a 13-pounder off of a bed, or you catch a 13-pounder 2 weeks before it's about to spawn. It's irrelevant because if you kept it, it doesn't get to spawn, right?
Well, yeah.
So that's well, I know, but people say, well, you catch that 13-pounder off a bed, she doesn't spawn. No, that's not true. You catch a 13-pounder and put it back, it's going to spawn. That shouldn't even be an argument. Anyone that sight fishes, we all know we let fish go back. They go back and get it right back on the bed. 9 times out of 10, they do that. Even if they don't, they're still going to probably spawn somewhere else. But yeah, I can't tell you how many times in tournaments, one, we either lose a fish and still catch it, or I remember even that tournament I went on Toledo Bend. The week before, I caught this 547, and on day 1, I went back and caught her a week later. Yeah. I caught her in practice because it was so far out in front of the event. I wasn't worried about it, and then she was still there a week later. So, anyways, My point being is it doesn't really matter. That's a keeping a fish thing. But we all sight fish, right? We all sight fish in tournaments. And I've always liked how people think that that shouldn't necessarily be allowed or how we're hurting it. And I can ask you and know this, if you're sight fishing in a tournament, let's not bring it at the tournament. If you're sight fishing for fun, you release all your fish anyways, right? So no big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're in a tournament sight fishing. What is the most fish you have ever caught in a day sight fishing in a tournament?
Oh, it's way lower than what people would ever expect. It's like 8
8,
or 10.
right? 10,
Like yeah,
max 10. And that's like a phenomenal day. So then
absolutely.
so you still release 5 fish of the sight fish back into the water, whatever. So you're keeping 5 fish off of a bed. Second, you caught at the most ever 10 fish that day.
Oh yeah.
And then you've got guys going out there throwing Cincos around, not sight fishing, doing whatever. Maybe they catch them off beds, maybe they don't. A lot of those guys in the springtime are catching 40, 50 fish a day.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
But we're only catching less than 10.
Oh yeah.
And we usually leave so many of them alone. And so I always like, hey, we need to close fishing in the springtime. I can promise you, I'm not the one hurting anything in the springtime. It's the guys catching tons and tons of fish, if that's your argument, right? I'm not making an argument for the springtime. I'm saying for the guys that do say we should close fishing in the spring. And I'm like, that's absurd. I've got so many arguments. I should have wrote them
Well,
all down.
I was gonna say, yeah. Whenever you start, I've seen the argument as far as like we should just cut spring fishing off and let the fish spawn and not interfere with their spawning habitat and all that, and that's great and whatever. I mean, you see it done up north. You see all these things, but the
Well,
deal is you're killing.
I want to
You're
ask you that. The
yeah,
North deal. The
yeah.
North deal. Do you know their argument for that?
No,
Well, they shut them down up here for the North, so it must be good. They
they
like,
who's
you know who they
yeah,
are, right?
yeah.
You're putting trust in people, and I get it that why are you putting trust in those people that think they know better? I'm
I mean,
sorry. Like,
the deal is like if you look at the average amount of money that comes in, all I can use as a reference is like Toledo Rayburn. But like if you look at the average amount of money that's brought into this community and these communities during, let's say, the end of February through the middle of April, and how full the boat ramps are, how much gas is purchased, how the stores are run, the hotels that are booked up. I mean, the costs are off the charts. And then as it gets hotter, as the fishing gets tougher, those boat ramps start thinning out and they thin out and there's less money and less money and less money. The problem is if say for instance we said, okay, no fishing in March and April in Texas, 0. I'm telling you guys, like, you want to talk about tanking some of these lake communities and tanking these areas, like, go ahead and do that and see what happens.
well, so yeah, but like,
It's dumb. I
I'm
mean,
gonna I'm gonna
it's
ask you.
dumb.
I'm gonna ask you some questions. If sight fishing is hurting certain fisheries, name the best places to sight fish in Florida.
My favorite would be like Harris Chain or
Keep going.
Toho, Okeechobee,
Name the best places to fish in Florida.
those same ones.
Name the best places to sight fish in Texas.
Ooh, I can't say all of them.
Okay.
Yeah, Rayburn, Texoma, Amistad. I mean, when you look at Toledo, well, it used to be Toledo, but I just don't know if the water's
You
gonna
mean
get
the best
classified enough.
places to fish?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I always laugh at the guys from up north going, look what they've done. Like, we're hurt. Like, they should be off limits during this time. Our best places to sight fish are the best lakes in the country. And why do I bring that up? Because they're the best, they're still the best lakes. And yet everyone's sight fishing on them. Not everyone, but there's tons of sight fishing on them.
Yeah.
If you got to bring me an argument where the correlation makes sense.
Yeah.
Toledo's not bad right now because of sight fishing.
No.
No. When
No,
it was
it's
right,
there's a yeah,
there's
there's
a
some
million reasons
yeah,
why.
yeah.
And I wrote on my comment because the comment's not up there. I guess he took it down. I put it on there like the sight fishing hurts Toledo would be about 452 on the list of why it would hurt Toledo.
Yeah.
And it really wouldn't be sight fishing, but there's no correlation that's ever said sight fishing is ever doing this thing. And here's the other thing: me and you sight fish. This is going to come off really, really arrogant. I think we can at least somewhat stand behind this statement because of our success in tournaments. We know what it takes to sight fish. We know how hard it is to catch certain fish. We know how many fish get passed over constantly. Like, say if you
Oh
go to
yeah.
Toledo Bend in the springtime and they're all in beds when it was good, say it was
Yeah,
good.
when it was good. Yeah.
Would you say there's times you see 300 to 400 fish a day?
Oh yeah.
Would you
Definitely.
say if you saw 400 fish a day on average, 375 of them are not getting caught off beds
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean,
by the
that's
average
what
fish?
yeah, by the average guy. And that and that kind of goes as two parts. So like fish just aren't so dumb as people think they are, especially if the water's anywhere near clear or clean or anything like that. I mean, I could take you to one of the very best banks on this lake that doesn't get a whole lot of pressure. Like nobody fishes it or anything like that. And there'd be lines of beds down this whole bank. And you could take a Cinco, you could take a whatever you want, a top water, whatever you wanted to fish, and you might get one or two bites down that entire bank. And it's got 100 of them down it, and you'll get two bites,
Yes.
and that's it.
And one of them will not be a 10 pounder.
And yeah, and they'll probably be 2 pounders, like what you
Right.
catch. But what you can see is 5 and 6 pounders, maybe a 7 or 8 pounder. Back, and I'm talking back in the day, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Back in the day.
But like, but the other thing is even let's just say for the sake of the argument, people want to say, well, sight fishing's killing everything. I can tell you this: I've been with Todd. Todd is probably one of the most premier sight fishermen that I've ever been in the boat with. Probably top 2 or 3, like around in that range. I mean, he's one of the top ones I've ever been in, and he can see them deeper than just about anybody I've ever seen. And the deal is there's so many fish that people miss anyway because their boat is sitting on top of them and they're looking in 6 inches of water because that's all they can physically see, or they're looking wrong, or they're wearing their wrong glasses, or there's so many different things that variables that could cause them not to see the right fish. But the deal is 9 times out of 10, the fish that we are trying to catch anyway, you can see like a fin, or you can see like a stripe. I mean, like it just you're not even seeing the whole fish. But my point to this is it's physically impossible, especially on a lake like Toledo, Rayburn, Texoma, any of these lakes that have a little bit of stain to them, to catch even remotely dent the population when sight fishing. If anything, fishing dirtier water lakes where you can fan cast a bait around and catch 50, 60, 70 fish on a Cinco is hurting it more than us going down the bank, burning the bank looking for a bed.
Well, and so I was going to say that. So if we're all these big fish that everyone's catching, John Cox caught an 11 pounder at Harris Chain, right? Off a bed.
Yeah.
How many guys caught 11 pounders fishing in that tournament?
0, right?
0, right? How many guys probably go out there and catch 11 pounders in their lifetime?
Not very many.
Not very many.
Yeah.
And everyone's gonna be like, well, isn't that a case against sight fishing? No, that's what we're saying, is that if it was so easy for all these guys to go out there and catch all these 11 pounders off of beds, why don't y'all just go down to Florida and catch you 11 pounder and say, hey, I've now caught a double digit. Good luck.
Exactly.
Good luck going down there and trying to catch a big one off of a bed sight fishing. There are very few people in the entire country that know how to do and find one and do all that. And he didn't kill the fish. He let it go. And you know what? There were probably 400 other 11 pounders this year down there in Florida that are going to spawn that will never be found, will never be seen, right? That it's the other thing they were talking about, all this springtime stuff. Go out in the springtime on these lakes and try to sight fish for a month and tell me what happens.
Oh yeah.
You know what's going to happen? You're going to get some good days in there. Then you're going to get a week where it blows about 30 every day from these south winds, and the norther's going to come through. It's going to rain for 3 or 4 days. Like there's going to be these weeks in there where you can't go sight fish, or like days. I mean, I've done it. And what happens when, oh yeah, there's like 15% of the population, the entire bass population goes and spawns during that week, maybe even like 25%. They never get caught by sight fishermen. Now you might go out there and catch one on a spinnerbait, right? And you're like, well, I didn't caught a 10 pounder on a spinnerbait. And I'm like, yeah, it was off a bed. What's the difference between you catching off a bed and someone else? So I mean, like, nature has a way of taking care of itself. And so that is my point. There's so many things that go into this. And I'm just like, you catching 0.0000, I can't even put the number of zeros in front of that, a fish off of a bed. That's how much of a small population that you're actually catching off of a bed. And then it really doesn't matter because there's only 0.000 whatever percent of fish from those fish that actually make it.
Well, so
Right.
it's funny that we're talking about sight fishing. So I had a memory come up on my Facebook. I think it was yesterday, and it was actually day one of the Toyota series on Rayburn that I was leading after day one. It was like 27 pounds, whatever it was. And the reason I bring this up is because that was a pretty good sight fishing tournament, and a lot of the sight fishermen caught them. You ended up winning that tournament. And Bonds caught them. I caught them. You know, the handful of the guys that do it a lot caught them sight fishing. But what people don't understand, unless you fish that tournament, is the weather on day one was great, fantastic. Day two was decent. Day three was terrible weather. It blew like 100 miles an hour. Like it was terrible. And that's the day you blasted them.
And I caught them sight fishing by not all of them. I went and sight fished one creek, which goes in. But I decided to go into one creek that was dirty all of practice.
Yeah.
And I was like, but it was out of the wind. And I'm like, you know what? What if that cleared up? Because we had gotten rain before that. So what if that had cleared up and it's out of the wind and no one went in there and sight fished? Well, that thing had, once again, on Rayburn, there was an entire creek that was not being sight fished for probably quite a few days. Like there was plenty of fish that went in there, spawned, and got done. And I went in there and caught like a 5 and a 4.
Yeah.
But once again, that was one more, back to what I was saying. There was one more creek that like it got kind of blown out where no one could go in there and catch any fish. And I'm sure.
Yeah, but it's not like they stopped spawning. Yeah.
Yeah, they just
didn't stop spawning.
Just couldn't see them. I went in there and caught 2.
Well, but my whole point to that whole entire thing is that like I caught 27. I think Bonds on day one caught a big bag. You had over 20. I didn't find the fish that I think he caught a 10 pounder on day one.
He did.
I didn't find that fish. And there's so many, like there was that many fish on beds that I think Todd and I shared like 2 fish on day one that we both around the bridge area that we both had kind of found. But like nobody was like we weren't over the top of each other. That just shows you how many fish when they push up on an area that like everybody's like, oh well, you know they see these tournaments in Florida where they're bumper boats and they're literally flipping on a bed next to another bed. When you get on a big lake like on a Sam Rayburn, Toledo Bend, a Texoma, I mean I could go through the list of lakes where we sight fish. When they push up, like I could go look for 3 days and find new fish every single day and not have, I mean, like it's ridiculous the amount that pull up there. And we're literally still catching 5 to 10 a day. Like that's what we're catching.
And what's crazy is even like on Toledo Bend, and I don't want to share this too publicly about it, but like I'll put it to this.
You're sharing it on YouTube, so it's
well, I don't want to
public.
share. So, well, I'm careful about what I'm about to say. Where people look for most sight fish is what every textbook tells you to, every magazine tells you to go look for.
Well, yeah, I agree.
I'm telling you that I have made a living by finding fish that no one looks for, because what do you mean they're going to spawn out there? Yeah, I said out there, right? There are places where they spawn that are so far away from the bank and so far that people wouldn't realize. And it happens in so many places. Like people have no idea. I mean, there are millions, guys, millions of fish in a lake. And we said on the best day at Toledo, you could see 300 or 400 a day. And that's
Oh yeah.
usually because we were getting around certain places and like you see one every like 7 or 8 foot. But we would
Yeah.
drive in idle places like flats out there on the main lake
Oh
where
yeah.
people are just out there thinking they're everywhere out there. And
Yeah.
every flat on that lake has the same thing going on. And none of those are ever getting fished for because you have to have the most pristine, perfect, zero like glass day to go
Glass,
fish.
high sun, like not a lot of boat traffic. Boat traffic
It
plays
happens
into
like,
that. Yeah.
yeah, like twice a month you can go do that. And we've seen it, and
Yeah.
it's like, man, there are a bunch of 10 pounders out here spawning. You can't go sight fish them. I
And
mean, it's almost
you can't
impossible.
go sight fish them, and you can't just go cast them and catch
No,
them. It's just not
no,
one of those kind of fish. Like
no.
those are like the kind of fish what you're talking about are the ones that you spend an hour on and you still might not catch it. Like I mean, it's just
We've
you
had
know,
we've had two tournaments that I've seen where Grand, the first time I ever went to Grand, when the entire top 10 was sight fishing, right?
yeah,
My co-anglers both on day 1 and day 2 zeroed. Um, my co-angler day 3 smashed them. He was doing, but it was so hard to just normally catch a normal fish, like just fish. Everyone in the top 10 was sight fishing. And I bring that up because it's Grand Lake. You should be able to go and just catch fish. They weren't all
oh
up on
yeah,
beds, but yet guys couldn't go catch those fish on beds. Like people were like talking about how they'd fish for 20 fish that day and not catch any of them.
oh yeah,
And right. And so Toledo Bend, when we had that fog, did you make the cut? You made the cut, right? Yeah, you made the
yeah,
cut.
yeah,
Russell won. I came in third.
yeah. Because I think I came in like fourth. I
Fourth
finished
or
fourth. I
yeah,
finished
fourth.
fourth
Yeah.
or fifth. Yeah.
Dude, like co-anglers were all zeroing. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
couldn't hardly catch a fish fishing or even off of it. Like you couldn't just go down a bank and throw a Cinco. Those fish wouldn't bite. So I mean, the bedfish, they were so hard to catch. So I mean, guys were talking about like, man, yeah, I saw like 50 of them I couldn't catch. So I
Oh,
mean,
that one was really hard. That was
right,
a
because
but see, but as the tournament progressed in that one, it was really interesting. Uh, the sight fishing got better because it was so cold in the beginning of
yeah,
that
it was
tournament.
weird.
It was really weird. It was like you could catch a few, and they were so hard. They were so fresh. And then like day two, they got a little bit easier,
But
but
you'd
day
see them
three, oh
in
yeah, you see
practice,
them,
you'd
but you
see
couldn't
them
catch them. Yeah,
and you turn back around and they'd be gone.
yeah,
Remember that? Like,
100%. Yeah,
so that's what I'm saying. We know so much about the sight fishing of not just the 1 day deal. Like we see
yeah.
7 days of sight fish and how they react and what they do. And remember, oh, that was the one I had that 13. Remember, I had that like
There were some
there
giants
was like a
pulled up.
13 or 14
Yeah.
pounder underneath this grass mat, underneath this hyacinth. And I just happened to see just her nose sticking out. And I was like, and that's the one I started on. And you were over there. It was, I went for this one fish and I knew where all these other fish were in this one creek. Andrew went in there. I went and sat on this one fish. It was early in the morning time. And Andrew goes around it was just horrible. I just saw him fucking fish. He'd go up to one, make a couple casts, catch one, go. And I was sitting there going, but I had to like bypass all them
Yeah,
to go sit.
he had to go sit on that one. I mean, and that's
But I didn't.
honestly, but that's a very good point though. Is what people I mean, unless you've done it, when you go sight fishing in one of these big tournaments, you find a big one. You got to make a decision. Okay, do I go sit on that big one first, or do I go catch the easiest ones that I know about? That
And
you
right.
know,
And there was a male on a bed next to this hyacinth mat, and she would sit there like 3 foot away, maybe 2 foot away. And so Andrew was talking about how it was cold. Well, it was cold and it was warming up every day. And that evening was like the warmest evening. And I rolled up there that morning and it finally got light enough. Yep, she spawned overnight and left. Like I never even made like she never sat on that bed, but overnight she went up there, spawned and left.
yeah,
Another 13 or 14 pounder that no one caught, like spawned. I would have never even been able, I might have been able to catch her that one evening before that, like before
yeah,
the day. Like I would have had to have found her that day. The other days, I think I found her 2 days before that. I wouldn't have been able to catch her because she was off the bed sitting underneath the mat. And
yeah,
I think I flipped on her. I mean, they don't even move. So my point being is like, we all look at like the single fish we catch. We don't think about all the ones that spawn and get out of there. And like I said, it's these blanket statements that people make that frustrate me that don't have. When I made that comment earlier about the people from up north putting regulations on lakes, they might be right, okay, about the northern lakes and some of that stuff. I personally don't think so. I think smallmouth up there on those big lakes there's so many of them that it'd be different if you're catching one off of the one. I'm not talking about keeping them, I'm just talking about catching them
Yeah.
because we don't keep any of our fish. Um, I just not going to listen to them or people when they just make blanket statements. And if you want to sit there and come and talk to me about how you've seen over time and you can explain everything I'm explaining, not just going, well, yeah, man, I mean, you're ruining the lake. It's bad for it. Well, that's because someone told me that. No, like give me a reason. Like tell me how over years you've seen how it doesn't affect these lakes, because I can tell you every good sight fishing lake I've ever been on, when they go downhill, I can tell you the reason why. It's because of the water quality, floods,
Yeah.
losing grass, all these other things. It's never sight fishing.
Or people just eating them
Or people,
nonstop.
yeah. But that's a totally different issue.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, if your lake, if they stop it from March to April, right, of you fishing, and there's a 13 pounder out there and you catch it in January, it's still not going to spawn. What's the
Yeah.
difference? There is
Yeah,
no difference.
there's no difference.
Right. So
You'd almost have to say no fishing from like the end of
ever.
December, the December all the way
Well, yeah, but
April.
if you still
Like
but if you
yeah,
still catch a 13 pounder, you're still taking out of the water. It's never going to spawn after that. So
no,
it's not a sight fishing thing. It's a keeping fish, big fish thing.
yeah,
Right. So it's irrelevant. I mean, so what if we'll talk about this some other time, but like the Josh Jones, like they caught a 17 pounder, right? The other day.
yeah,
If they killed it, if you caught it off the bed or not, if it dies, that 17 pounder still didn't get to spawn.
exactly.
Whether you caught it off the bed or you kept it out there live scoping with an Alabama rig, I'm not saying that's how. I don't know. I'm just saying.
That's how it was caught. Was
Okay,
on
well,
the
what's
Alabama
the
rig. But
difference?
yeah, but there's I mean it's full of eggs. It's not going to get to spawn
Yeah,
if you keep it. Like I mean it's just what it is. But I mean I do think we're in a better place these days though. Thankfully, uh, the majority, especially tournament anglers, we look at it as a almost like a sin to keep a bass anymore. But you still have, I mean, I follow a report on Toledo Bend on Facebook, and actually, I probably shouldn't follow it because it just makes me like just super ill. Because they'll post pictures of like a whole deck full of bass. I saw one like 2 days ago. Guy posted a picture of a deck full of bass, anywhere between 2 and 4 pounds. And this lake has been struggling, guys. I'm gonna be the first to tell you, Toledo Bend is definitely not where it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago. It is struggling immensely. Guys are going out there right now and catching some because they're
it's
starting to
the
push up.
best.
I mean,
It's the best time of the year to catch them.
yeah, it's
February
the
to
best
March.
time of year. I mean, and that's just what it is. Uh, but keeping a deck full of bass and eating them, I wouldn't like. I'm all about eating some fish and conservation and making sure you eat the right ones, some small males, things like that, whatever. I'm all about it. And keeping some if you're just hungry and you just want to eat some fish that day, cool. But if you do it day in and day out and you're keeping max limits every time you go hit the water, just for the sake that you can take a picture on the deck of your boat, that is a problem. And
But that's
and on a place like Toledo Bend that is in such bad shape as it is right now, I mean, if you want to go keep a fish, go fish a small lake that isn't getting the pressure or that is in good shape. Toledo is not that lake right now. We don't need to be eating fish every day on Toledo Bend.
well, there's two things to that story, and we have a lot of friends in Louisiana, and we have a lot of we know a lot what's going on
Yeah.
down there, right? No one's going to tell us more about what's going on in Toledo Bend than guys like us that know what's going on. But there's a difference between. I've always said when Toledo, the other day I said it, when Toledo was in its heyday, you could. I don't care if you had 5,000 people on that lake catching fish every day and keeping them.
Yeah.
Wouldn't hurt that lake. Guys, I don't think y'all understood how many fish were in that lake. It was absurd.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
And there's no way people could have hurt that lake. And I always believe that you cannot hurt a lake that's doing good Um, I mean, you're not making it better, but what I'm saying is it's very hard to hurt a lake that's like that good, right?
Yeah.
Now you might make it harder to catch fish, but I'm saying, like those lakes can replenish. It's amazing when everything's firing, right? They had tons of grass. The
Oh
lake
yeah.
is like phenomenal, right? Falcon was like that. Falcon, all the pressure never hurt Falcon. It was them drawing the water down and them not having any water. Same thing with Toledo. Toledo, it was the grass time, 100% grass time, some floods and some spraying. But really, if the grass was still there, it would like
We
no
wouldn't
matter
be having
what
this
would happen.
conversation. Yeah.
Correct. So,
I mean, and
but
ultimately, it's not saying that you have to have the grass to survive. Like when I say they wiped out grass on Toledo, for anybody that's watching that doesn't know, they wiped out all vegetation in the water, from hay grass
yeah,
to
but
hydrilla to pepper grass to every single type of vegetation. And the problem with that is when those fish do go up there to spawn, and their eggs hatch, and you got all these little fry around, where the heck are they gonna hide? There's literally no place for them to hide, and so they get eaten more, they get picked off more. And that is a problem on this lake right now, is the fact that, I mean, that's just one of the many problems. But
but but
you know
Toledo, but we're not talking about like Toledo Bend right now. We talk about it struggling compared to Lake Livingston.
still way better.
100 times better than Lake
Yeah.
Livingston, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about is the number one lake in the country, hands down. Like that's what it was. So we're talking
Yeah.
about thousands of lakes, and it was not even going to be. It it was no question. Toledo Bend stood above all of them, and it
Yeah.
wasn't even close. So we're taking something that most people will never. There's guys that live at Toledo. You might have been in high school and fished for 4 or 5 years, or in college, and that was your first time to witness Toledo, and you might not ever see a lake like that ever again in your lifetime. That was
Oh
that
yeah.
good.
Mm.
And so we're talking about something that for some people, that's the only time they'll ever see that, going to what it is now. Whereas I haven't even been over there in like 2 years because it's not worth it. It's not, there's all these other lakes I can go fish. When we talk about Toledo Bend and what you brought up, that picture of all those fish on the deck, and we know this is not just us making this up. That is not a that's a that picture was taken for one reason. That's for them to brag about how they can go catch fish. It's been that way. Like we know the guys that do it. It is this weird mentality from some of these people from that area, that it's a weird thing, and I don't understand it. But like they grew. It's it's like those guys that go out there and go kill deer all the time. Like they just
Yeah.
shoot a mass amount of deer illegally, and it's not even for food anymore. It's what they do. Like you can't go out there and catch
Yeah,
40 bass.
they couldn't eat the amount of deer that they shoot,
Right. And
like.
these guys are just doing this. And it's not like, hey, I'm gonna like I'll go out there and catch a whole bunch of crappie, right? And I froze them all. And me and my kids, and we had fish the other night, and then 2 nights ago we had fish tacos, right? Dude, I got 3 more bags. I'm gonna have to invite people over to eat the fish because we call like 40 crappie, right? Me and the kids. And it's gonna be a while for me to eat all that. These
Yeah.
guys are going out there and they're doing it, and they're taking these pictures, and it's a totally different mentality. It's not, hey, I need to eat. It's look at me type deal.
Yeah.
And that's I guess where we have not issue, because I don't care about people keeping bass. Like I don't do it.
No.
I can go catch crappie if I want to eat fish or catfish. Or dude, I grew up on white bass on Livingston for like,
Well, that's what I used to eat all the time. If I
yeah.
really wanted fish, but
And if you want to keep bass, that's fine. Like I'm not saying that. Like I do what you want to do, but there's a difference between, there's most of the guys who keep them around here, they just keep them. They're not posting on social media to like brag about it.
yeah.
Those
Well,
guys
and
down
and I
there
and
are
I and I
different.
do think there's another element to that too. You got the guys that are bragging, and then you got the guys that are trying to poke the bear, so
Poke
to
the bear,
speak.
yeah.
They're the ones that are posting it. They're trying to get a response. They're trying to get under people's skin for the fact that they're just internet trolls, and I'm not saying that the guy that posted this was either of those things, and
No,
I'm
no.
really not. It's just the idea of that. Uh, I just plead with the guys that are eating fish on Toledo right now is just kind of think about where the lake is. And yes, 8 years ago when the lake was just absolutely ridiculous and everybody that went fishing could catch 40, 50, 60 a day. Yeah, then you couldn't hurt it. Right now, when you catch 30 or 40 and you're eating like 20 of them, it hurts it. Like, because
Yes,
there's just
it does.
not the population that there used to be. It's not any other thing, is the population is not where it used to
Right.
be, not even close, truly. But now, is it a bad lake? No. But we're kind of in a rebuilding phase right now with Toledo and trying to get it back to where it needs to be. And if we just keep eating fish like we did 8 years ago, 10 years ago, then it's not going to get back to where it was.
And I've always said this, like I said earlier, when every lake is like on top,
Yeah.
almost nothing can make it drop, right? Like little factors here and there, like people keep keeping them. Um, you know, there could be 100 little factors in there, and not one of those little factors puts even a dent in a good lake.
But all of them together is
Well,
what
a
kills
bad
it.
lake,
Yeah.
like a lake that's like you said, rebuilding and trying to get better. Like,
Yeah.
when Okeechobee went through its deal, and like Harris Chain, Harris Chain's not probably in the greatest shape because like Harris lost all of its grass, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
And they
there's
continue to spray, and it's
right.
just made it way
So
tougher.
that's not great. But so when you do that, when something like that happens, right, that is not our fault, right? That's not the fisherman's fault. And then all of a sudden you start putting a little bitty, okay, everyone's out there keeping them, everyone's out there doing this, like the little factors, then those things hurt a bad lake. So
Yeah.
that's when I always look at it going, hey, what else? We're trying to rebuild. Whenever you try to rebuild something, doing things bad to something is not helping, right? And
Yeah.
that's you don't have to, and that's the only part. But like I said, and we'll end this real quick, but just for once, like I know on some of these comments on YouTube and some of these things, like we all say this because of our experiences with lakes, right? We're
Yeah.
not just making blanket statements because we're making them um to get a rise or anything like that. We're making these statements because usually we have arguments that we can back up for our own experiences. Like we've seen all these lakes, we've been there, we've done it, we've seen how none of this affects it, and then we have our minds are open enough to look around the country and go, hey, look, I've been to these other lakes too.
Yeah.
Think about what you're saying, but think how it doesn't really fit like we're hurting all these sight fishing is hurting all these lakes, but yet these are the best lakes to sight fish and they're the best lakes in the country still. Like, so it's not adding, it's like certain things aren't adding up. Maybe look at other factors. Because in my opinion, if you want to call it mother nature slash uh like the spraying, what would we call spraying? I know it's man-made, but I don't want to say it's fishermen aren't doing that.
Well, see, and that's what I was gonna say is like fishermen can only control what we can control. We can't control what the Sabine River Authority does or whatever your outdoor wildlife department does. We can't control when they spray, what they spray, how they spray. We honestly
Or
can't. We
the
can't.
government, like,
Yeah, we can't.
because like
We can't control them.
none of that's being affected on
Yeah.
Conroe. They put in all them carp on Conroe.
Yeah.
None of it's fishermen. It is all regulated by, because they wanted the money, because it's all for the rich people that live on Conroe that don't
Yeah.
want hydrilla to get sucked up in their motors, which because they don't
Yeah.
know
No,
any different.
that's
They're people
yeah.
that don't know what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
With
But I mean, but as fishermen, we have to kind of work together in this regard. But to tie it back to sight fishing and what we do with sight fishing has been around for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been fishing. Truly, I mean, since early 2000s. I mean, when did Rojas set that record? Like 2001, or I mean,
probably
you know what I'm saying? Like, so we're saying we're talking 20 plus years, maybe 30 years. I don't know
way
how
more,
when the
yeah, way
first.
more, yeah.
So 30, 40 years of sight fishing, and these lakes are still pushing out some of these enormous fish, enormous bags, a lot of numbers. Does it have the same effect as live scope? Not even close. It's just not. Um, you know, an average guy can go buy a live scope, for instance, because and to tie it back in, the guy who commented on Todd's post or on his video was referring as in reference to live scope and how sight fishermen are hurting lakes. It's not even the same realm, guys. Like, let's be honest. A normal guy can go buy a live scope, forward facing sonar, put it on his boat, and he's going to take it out there a week and he's going to figure out how to catch fish. The weather will not determine on whether or not he catches fish or not, because he's going to be able to see them. He's going to be able to catch them 9 times out of 10. Now, I've run into like that 1 out of 10 times where the fish just aren't cooperating, and you've got a massive cold front that shut them down, and they suck to the bottom, they suck to stumps, whatever. They don't want to chase things, so on and so forth. Look at the record that was just broke on, or not, I don't know if it was a record, but the 17 pounder was caught on Ivy. The guy was out there and it was 25 degrees outside, and it
Uh,
was a day where there was nobody on the water. You could not have been out there. Let's just say, for instance, that was going to be a day that you'd go out there sight fishing. You're not going to sight fish when it's 25 degrees.
no, and I'll bring this up too. Um, See, like you can always tell because I always know the answer before I ask this. What's the hardest fish to catch off of? What's the one fish that's impossible to catch off of a bay?
Oh, God. I mean, there's a couple answers.
When they're doing one thing.
Oh, yeah. When they're actually spawning,
There you go.
you
So
can't catch them.
you can't catch them. So those
No.
fish on beds are not spawning. Like when the fish is done actually laying her eggs and spawning, she leaves. Like if they are spawning, you pretty much have a zero chance of catching her. I think I've caught less than 10 in my life.
I was going to say, I've caught like 2 ever.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah.
So you're catching them before they get on the bed, which means they haven't laid their eggs. Okay.
Yeah.
I have more arguments to this. I forget. So you're catching them before they lay on their eggs. If you catch that 14 pounder, like I said, 2 days before with a Cinco and haul her off in a tournament, if you're complaining, this is what I always said, if you're complaining about people who sight fish, you are just as bad. Because if you go around and throw a Cinco and catch fish in the springtime, there's a chance you're catching them either off beds or 2 days before they're about to spawn.
Yep.
And then you're driving them off to a tournament, right? Which is a whole different level. That's tournament fishing. This has nothing to do with sight, but this tournament. Now we're in an argument about whether or not we should have tournaments in the springtime, which obviously we've been doing for 40 years and everything seems to be fine.
Yeah.
But you're hauling off a fish that's about to spawn and you think, oh, well, I caught her 2 days before she's about to spawn as opposed to you.
Off the bed. But it didn't matter. It's the exact same thing.
You're hauling her off to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, fish are pretty adaptive. There's a good chance when they let that fish go, if you took care of her or not, which everyone should have taken care of all their fish in that entire tournament. There's a good chance they'll go and spawn in those creeks, which I know they do, because whenever they have tournaments out of those places, it's why a lot of those places are so good. Like the actual tournament site is so good because they release them all and those fish go and spawn and it's fine. So that's the other thing. Here's the other deal. So which worse? I'll pose this last question. What's worse? You catching a fish, a 12 pounder. Let's just call it 10. It doesn't matter. You catch a 10 pounder off of a bed. Okay. Or you catch the 3 pounder a week later guarding the fry.
Yeah, there's no difference.
A 3 pounder is guarding the fry that it's all 10-pound eggs that have made it, that have hatched, that are now fry, and the 3 pounder's guarding it, trying to get them to live. And you go throw your Cinco over there and the 3 pounder eats it. You catch it, think, I didn't catch it off a bed. You put it in the live well, it takes it away. And all those 10-pound fry that might have made it, totally get eaten.
Yep.
So, like I said, it's a whole, which is happening all the time. And I'm not mad about it because history has shown over the last 40 years that our lakes are doing fine, regardless of whether or not we are fishing in the springtime.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like we've been
saying?
fishing the spawn for a real long time, and it's not something that you can use electronics for most of the time. It's not something that, you know, yeah, everybody can go fish, but that doesn't mean everybody's catching them 24/7 or even catching like 1% of what's actually up there. So the fish are still able to spawn. Like we've literally been fishing through the spawn for since the beginning of fishing. Like fishing anything, like tournaments, like in the 70s. Like they were fishing spawn and fish then. And we still to this day have massive fish and they're all over the place. Ultimately, when it comes to sight fishing, you have to use your eyes. You have to be able to see them. Then you have to be able to trick them to catch them, which, let's be honest, Todd, you and I have been stuck on fish before that we never caught. Like physically never caught. Me and you together in tournaments have fished for fish that we just never caught.
Which one?
There's not as many, but the point is that there are some fish that are just that you're just not going to catch if they're not set up right. You have the wrong conditions. I remember one in particular fish on Toledo that we sat there and fished for over an hour. I ended up catching it, but it was the weirdest acting fish that there was.
You
We
caught
had
it though.
wind start. We did catch it. We had wind starting to kick up. It got really tough. It got really windy, and that's what you deal with whenever you're dealing with sight fishing. Is it's not a everyday thing, and even on the days that it is good, it still doesn't mean that it is good because the fish might have pushed off. You know, like even on the perfect weather day, they might not be up there,
And
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 that's
what
just that's
and
just
what
the reality of it.
and what I've always said, like everyone always like a lot of people are around certain lakes. Amstead's one. There's certain lakes where they fluctuate like good and bad.
Oh yeah,
And I always tell people, like, so the guys that live there always are like, oh, they're out there. Oh, they're out there. You just can't, like Toledo Bend. For a lot of times, guys are like, no, those fish are on Toledo Bend are out there. Y'all just can't catch them.
yeah.
And I'm like, look, man, when Toledo Bend was good, I could go up on the bank and show you 500 a day.
Well,
I mean,
and but see now, and this was what I will say. You could show them 500 a day, and even when it was bad, you could still show them probably close to 300. The difference was is you didn't see any, almost any of the right ones.
right.
When Todd's talking, he was seeing 500 a day. I would say I'd go, and this is not an exaggeration because I've been in the
Five,
boat with him.
five,
Yeah,
over 10
yeah,
every day,
yeah, every day.
every day.
And
And
not to mention the sheer amount over 5 pounds,
not
three
on
pounds.
beds.
No, just cruising on
They'd be
beds.
cruising up
Yeah,
there, getting
yeah,
ready. And
yeah.
and here's the crazy part, because me and Jarrett used to talk about this. If you go fish certain creeks, right, and there might be 2 or 3, 400 beds in that creek, as you're going around there. So we'd go practice sometimes 2 or 3 days before an event, and we go out there and like mark them all. And the next day you go out there, and all your marks they're gone. And then there's like you see like say you saw like 25 or 30, which is no exaggeration, like 30 fish over 5 pounds easy. And you go out there and you're like, I just saw 30 fish over 5 pounds again today, and they're all on different beds.
Yeah.
Like they're not the same fish. They're like literally, and then the next day it would change. And the one thing I'll say, and this is something that I learned, this is one of the trick. It's not a trick, but it was just a deal. I learned that when I won that tournament on Toledo, sight fishing, there weren't that many fish on beds. Would you agree?
Yeah, there wasn't very many.
Like it was Toledo Bend was okay at that point in time. Like
Yeah.
it,
It wasn't great. It
it
wasn't
wasn't
great.
great. It wasn't great till later on. And what I learned is the worse a lake is, or how do I put it? I'll put it this way. The better a lake is, the faster they spawn.
Mhm.
So like Florida is real bad about that, right? They spawn so fast in Florida. Like
Yeah.
they move up and up onto the beds and move off, right? It's
It
why,
just goes to show you how many fish are there. I mean,
yes, the more fish that are in the lake, the faster they spawn.
yeah.
And I'm like, and I've realized it's because a lake that's not as good. And I was really good about finding fish that no one else found, and they were usually off by themselves. And the reason I was able to find, and I started dawning on me that like those fish are off by themselves. They're not doing it on purpose. They just find a place, and they don't spawn as quick because they don't find any. there's not a bunch of fish rolling up there to spawn with it.
No, you're not gonna have to go relook that after you catch that
Right.
fish.
Because but you get them in a big giant area with a bunch of fish, they spawn super fast because there's multiple fish rolling through there. And like, it's like, I swear it's God's way. It's like nature's way of going, hey, get in and get out. Others are moving in, and they just do it faster. But you find them other lakes, like you'll find fish for 4 or 5, 6 days on a lake that sit there on a bed. I mean, I've
Oh
seen it.
yeah,
Like, you can go there every day and see the same fish, and it's usually when lakes aren't that great is when that happens. But
yeah, no
anyways,
doubt.
that's my sight fishing one.
Well, there we go.
And oh man, and guys, go read the comments. Go read the comments, because there'll be one on there, and it'll usually be from up north. And I understand those north guys and the smallmouth thing. I'll stand by my comment, man. I don't want any regulation. I don't want any of these guys going out there telling me when I can and can't fish. I'm sorry. I'd rather a lake just go to horrible than to tell me, hey, by the way, you can't go fish during these months. Because I feel sorry for the guys up north. I mean, they got ice halfway through the year, right?
And then they can't even fish the best time.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
like, guys, y'all got so many fish up there. I promise that a couple guys going out there sight fishing and gonna hurt it. And they're like, well, they've done studies. I'm like, well, dude, come down here to our lakes. It's a free for all nonstop with people. I mean, I went out there Tuesday to crappie fish. There were 20 guys at the one boat ramp.
Yeah.
Dude, it never gets a break. And it's gonna take 25, 30 pounds this weekend. I mean, they're gonna catch them.
Yeah. Agreed.
I know we got a different lake. They'll say, well, you got different lakes down there. I'm like, I know, but man, if it was a bad lake, people still they just wouldn't catch as many. But it has nothing to do with the guys fishing.
No, it doesn't.
All right.
All right, buddy. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you.
See you, man.